Freydis turned, the heavy iron key still cold in her palm, and froze. Magnus Eriksson was already there, his massive silhouette filling her doorway like a mountain of shadow and heat. He didn't have a ledger in his hand. He didn't offer a pretense about border disputes or council meetings. He simply stood with one hand braced high against the frame, his shoulders squared with controlled, predatory stillness. Behind her, the window cast a jagged pool of cold, blue moonlight across the floor. Behind him, the corridor torches bathed his back in a burning amber glow. The contrast made him look less like a king and more like a myth. Half god, half beast, and entirely focused on her. "You're late," he said, his voice a low, jagged vibration that seemed to hum to the very floorboards beneath her boots. "I was finishing the dossiers of northern clans," Freydis replied, her pulse a frantic drum against her ribs. She gripped her cloak, desperate to maintain the mask of the professional matchmaker she was hired to be. "Why are you here, Magnus?" The same reason as last night. She didn't ask what that reason was. She already knew. 2 weeks ago, she had arrived to find this Alpha King's 7 perfect mates. He had rejected every royal, every beauty, and every political prize she offered. And now, every night, he came to her door, not to find a queen, but to claim the woman who was supposed to give him away. Welcome to Bound to the Alpha. If you are new here, don't forget to turn on your notification bell, so you don't miss our new videos. Like and share this story with those who need it. And if you are enjoying this journey, please hit the subscribe button. It means the world to us. 2 weeks earlier, the air at the Nordic fortress had been sharp enough to bleed. Freydis arrived not as a guest, but as an architect of fate, flanked by 7 high-born candidates and a mountain of clinical dossiers. Her method was precise. She mapped political advantages against Magnus Eriksson's known weaknesses with the cold efficiency of a strategist preparing for siege. "You look like you're mounting a head on a wall, not a crown on a queen," Signa whispered, leaning against a frost-dusted pillar. Her companion's teasing was the only thing that ever threatened to crack Freydis's professional mask. The reality of the task, however, proved more grueling than the dossiers suggested. Magnus dismissed the first candidate in under 10 minutes. The second, a princess of the Southern Isles, barely survived a single formal dinner before he walked out. By the time they reached the 5th candidate, a woman of unrivaled grace, Freydis watching the gallery as Magnus stared at the cold stone wall instead of the beauty across from him. Something shifted in Freydis's chest, a sharp, nameless tether that she refused to acknowledge. "He's not going to choose any of them, Fry," Signa said later, her eyes reflecting the flickering hearth. "He doesn't have a choice," Freydis replied, her voice as rigid as the ice outside. "The bloodline requires it." Signa offered a small, knowing smile. He seems to disagree. The smell of cedar and rain in Magnus' halls couldn't mask the rot Freydis felt creeping in from the edges of her mission. Signa found her in the dimly lit archives, her voice a sharp blade in the silence. "Lady Astrid isn't here to wear a crown, Fry. She's here to become a widow." Freydis didn't argue. She couldn't, before she had left for the fortress. A shadow from her past, a handler from the Syndicate, had appeared in her garden with a thick parchment. It wasn't a dossier. It was a hit list. Every couple Freydis had matched over the last 3 years was on it. The message was bone-chillingly simple. "Place our candidate on Magnus' throne, or we begin with the first name on this list." That night, the nightmare returned with visceral clarity. She was 9 again, the air thick with the copper tang of blood and the roar of a burning village. She could hear her parents' voices shouting for her to run, and then, with a sickening finality, the voices stopped. The Syndicate had found her 7 days later, shivering and half dead in the ash. They hadn't saved her. They had harvested her, calling her gifted, while they forged her into a weapon. As Freydis stared into the dying embers of the archive's hearth, the crushing truth settled over her. She had never been the independent matchmaker she pretended to be. The Syndicate had simply let the leash run long, and now they were snapping it back. The air in the armory was thick with the scent of cold steel and rhythmic exertion. Freydis had retreated there to escape the suffocating weight of the Syndicate's leash, but she found the room already occupied. Magnus was a blur of lethal motion, his blade whistling through the air with a focused violence that suggested he wasn't just practicing. He was trying to outrun something clawing at him from the inside. She stood in the shadows, watching longer than professionals should, mesmerized by the raw power in his form. Without breaking his rhythm, he spoke, his voice cutting through the ringing of steel. "You've been standing there for 3 minutes. Freydis, are you evaluating my form for the dossiers?" "I was clearing my head," she admitted, stepping into the torchlight. The conversation that followed wasn't about candidates or political alliances. Instead, they spoke of the crushing gravity of leadership, the cost of being the hollow vessel for a kingdom's needs. Magnus paused, pulling aside the collar of his tunic to reveal a jagged, silvered scar near his collarbone. "From the last person who thought ruling me was easier than asking," he murmured. Freydis felt a chill. She recognized a specific, jagged pattern. It was the unmistakable signature of a Syndicate-made blade. She remained silent, her expression a careful mask, but Magnus' amber eyes narrowed as he studied her reaction. "You recognize a mark," he noted, his voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate level. "Who taught you to read wounds, Freydis?" She turned to leave, her heart a heavy stone. "Someone who made them." The headache had been written in the tight line of Magnus' jaw for days, a rhythmic pulsing that Freydis recognized from her mother's old teachings. She brewed the willow bark tonic in the dead of night, the steam carrying the scent of bitter herbs and forgotten memories. She did not knock. Instead, she left the vial on a silver tray outside his heavy oak door and retreated into the shadows, a ghost avoiding her own master. Later that night, the temperature plummeted, turning the fortress air into a crystalline bite. Freydis wanted to pull her window shut against the encroaching frost, but her hand froze on the latch. Below, in the moonlit courtyard, a massive wolf paced the perimeter of the frozen fountain. He was ink-black with frost-white markings that looked like ancient runes etched into his fur. His eyes were not animal. They were burning amber, glowing with a restless human heat. He circled once, then twice, before stopping dead. He tilted his massive head back, looking directly up at her window. Their eyes locked across the dark and the biting cold, an admission passing between them that no words could carry. Panic flared in her chest, and she yanked the curtain shut, her heart hammering. "He was looking for you," Signa said casually from bed, unbothered by the intrusion, as she chewed on a hunk of stolen bread. He was pacing. Freydis snapped, leaning her back against the glass. Signa swallowed and shrugged. Same thing. The selection dinner was a masterpiece of orchestrated desire. Freydis had curated every detail. The scent of crushed jasmine, the soft amber glow of the hearth, and Lady Astrid, draped in silk that matched the color of a winter sunrise. From the shadows of the arched corridor, Freydis watched, her heart a leaden weight. She had built this stage specifically to make Magnus fall for someone who wasn't her. But Magnus was a terrible actor. He barely glanced at Astrid, his fingers tracing the rim of his wine glass with restless agitation. His gaze drifted constantly to the dark window, to the high rafters, to anywhere but the woman smiling across from him. After 20 minutes of agonizing politeness, he stood and excused himself, his stride heavy and impatient. Freydis slipped away through the servant passages, desperate to reach her quarters, but she took a wrong turn through the long gallery. She found him there, standing before the 7 portraits of the rejected candidates. The painted faces of the realm's most perfect women looked on, lifeless and elegant. "Do you know why I rejected them?" Magnus asked, his voice echoing against the stone. "They weren't suitable," Freydis whispered, her back to him. "They weren't real," he countered, stepping into her space until she could feel the heat radiating from him. "They all wanted the crown. You want to leave." He turned her to face him, his eyes burning with a terrifying clarity. "Why is that the thing that makes me want you to stay?" He didn't wait for an answer. He kissed her, a hard, desperate claim that tasted of salt and hidden truths. For one shattered second, Freydis kissed him back, losing herself in the amber fire of him. Then, reality crashed down. She broke away and ran, the sound of her own heartbeat drowning out the silence of the gallery. The second nightmare was older, forged in the iron and ice of the Syndicate's inner sanctum. Freydis was 17 again, the air in the training room tasting of copper and sweat. She stood paralyzed as the instructor forced her chin up, his grip like a vice, making her watch as another operative was broken for Senna trying to leave. "Remember this," he had hissed into her ear. "The Syndicate is your only family. Everything else is a target." She woke with those words ringing in her ears, her skin slick with a cold sweat that the Nordic furs couldn't warm. The professional mask was cracked beyond repair. The certainty was now a jagged blade in her mind. Lady Astrid wasn't here to play at politics or win a king's heart. Seeking the biting clarity of frost, Freydis slipped into the walled garden at dawn. Hidden by the heavy shadows of the juniper bushes, she froze. Astrid was there, speaking in low, hurried tones to a hooded contact. "The bond first." Astrid's voice was devoid of the warmth she'd shown at dinner. "Then the heir. Once the succession is secure, removal of the king will be swift." The blood drained from Freydis' face. The selection ceremony had been moved forward. 2 days. She had 48 hours to save Magnus from a widow's blade, protect the innocent couples on the Syndicate's list, and find a way to break her own chains. The clock was no longer ticking. It was screaming. For the first time since her arrival, Freydis did not wait for the night to bring Magnus to her. Instead, she stood before his towering oak door and knocked, her knuckles bruised from the force of her own heartbeat. When he opened it, his amber eyes flared with sharp, hopeful heat that nearly broke her resolve. She didn't let him speak. The words spilled out in a low, frantic torrent. The Syndicate's shadow, the hit list of every match she had ever made, and the jagged truth that she had been sent as a silent weapon aimed directly at his heart. She stood back, bracing for the inevitable fury of an Alpha King betrayed. She expected him to cast her into the dungeons, or worse, to look at her with the same cold indifference he showed the portraits. Instead, Magnus reached out, his hand steady as he brushed a stray hair from her forehead. "I knew you were a storm, Freydis," he murmured. "I just didn't know who sent you." He didn't reach for a blade. He asked for a pen. By dawn, the room was a war room. They sent riders to every name on the Syndicate's list, providing the protection her blackmailers had used as a leash. Together, they traced the rot to its source, a lord who had served Magnus' father for 20 years. To seal the trap, Freydis delivered the news to Astrid. The king had chosen her. The bait was set. With only 1 day left, the predator was finally becoming the prey. The grand hall was a sea of flickering torchlight and deceptive elegance. Along the walls, the 7 portrait frames stood like silent ghosts, the faces of the rejected candidates watching the end of an era. Magnus stood at the head of the hall, resplendent and lethal, his amber eyes cutting to the crowd to find Freydis. For a heartbeat, the world was silent. Then the lights died. Chaos erupted as Syndicate agents plummeted from the rafters, silver blades flashing in the gloom. The handler's whistle activated every sleeper agent within the fortress walls. Freydis didn't hesitate. She tore the heavy hem of her gown and moved with the clinical, guild-trained fury of a woman reclaiming her life. Beside her, Signa hurled a torch into the velvet curtains, creating a roar of fire that forced the shadows into the light. Freydis pursued the handler into a narrow corridor, the air thick with smoke. When her blade was parried, she used the Syndicate's own cruelest lesson. She dropped her weapon, stepping into his guard to deliver a crushing blow. As he slumped, a flicker of movement caught her eye. Astrid emerged from the darkness, a poison-tipped blade aimed directly for Freydis' spine. "No!" Magnus' roar shook the stone. He threw himself between them, taking the strike meant for her. The silver blade sunk deep into his shoulder. Freydis watched in horror as thick, Black veins began to spread from the wound like cracks in rotting ice. Magnus collapsed, his amber eyes dimming as the poison took hold. The healers were frantic, their hands stained with the black sludge of the silver poison. Magnus lay on the cold stone, his breath a shallow rattle, and the lead healer looked at Freydis with hollow eyes. 1 hour, he whispered. Maybe less. Signa gripped Freydis' arm, her voice urgent. The mate bond, Fry. Completing it might anchor his soul to his body. It could give him the reason to fight back. It might just be a myth. Freydis choked out, staring at his graying skin. It's the only option left. Freydis knelt, her tears falling onto his collarbone. She leaned down, pressing her lips to his burning temple, and whispered into his ear, I hope you can forgive me for this. With a desperate surge of conviction, she bit down on his claiming mark. Gold and amber light exploded between them, a visceral shockwave that rattled the hall. The black veins receded instantly, the poison neutralized by the ancient magic of a true match. Magnus' eyes snapped open, the amber fire returning with a vengeance. You bit me, he rasped, his hand finding the back of her head. You were dying, she countered, her voice trembling. A slow, possessive grin touched his lips. I know. I'm not angry. 3 months later, the portraits were gone, replaced by light. Freydis stood by the cold blue window of the Queen's chambers, reading a letter from the first couple she had ever matched. They had named their son Magnus. Astrid was in the dungeons, and Signa was already proving to be a terrifyingly effective head of intelligence. The amber warmth of Magnus settled behind her. Together? He asked, pulling her back against his chest. Together, she agreed. They had a syndicate to dismantle, but they were finally unbreakable. Thank you for watching the final chapter. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to join the pack by hitting the subscribe button. Always shout out your territory in the comment section. We love to see where our pack is watching from.